I'm Allison Gilbert. I'm joining you from New York. I'm an author here of several books about grief and loss and resilience. And it's really only because of Keeper, which is this amazing online platform where you can memorialize your loved ones in perpetuity, that we are able to join you here today. We are also grateful for Reimagine for helping us promote the event and being a place that wants to kind of give a bullhorn to these kind of conversations. When Keeper asked me to put this event together, I was honored to do so. This has been my life's work. As I mentioned, I've written several books about grief and loss, but I've also done two things in the time of COVID-19 that makes me understand this moment, perhaps more than I did or could have otherwise. When COVID first began, I was asked to join the global COVID-19 Relief Coalition. That has really given me a great kind of vantage point of what the most experienced experts are saying right now about death and grief and resilience and funerals and obituary writing in this moment that we are in right now. And I'm also part of a movement right now to hopefully get the incoming White House in the United States to establish the first ever White House Office of Bereavement Care. So I feel like I am just the right person to be talking to you today. And I am thrilled yet again that Keeper is allowing us to have this really important platform. So I'm going to introduce our esteemed guest today. Kate Buford is going to be joining us today. Abby Santamaria had incredible logistics trouble joining us today. She is on Block Island in Rhode Island, and there was a storm which wiped out her internet access. And so we're just going to rock and roll. And Kate is going to take the helm without her partner in crime. Listen, this is the age of Zoom, right, Kate? We're just going to make it work. And I'm so happy to have you here, Kate.
Thank you very much, Allison. I'm thrilled to be here, and I hope I can do justice to Abby's absence.
So we're going to dig right in. I want to make sure we're not wasting anyone's time. And so when I think about writing an obituary, there's the basic information, and then there's the more colorful information, the more kind of anecdotal information that people may be, wanting to include. But I want to start with the very basics. What must an obit include that would make it perfect? What must it have?
Actually, what it must have, it applies both to the traditional and also to the more creative obit. And they are the basic facts, like just the facts, ma'am. The date and place of death, plus the cause of death, which is optional, schools attended, work history, names of spouse, children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. Very important, names of siblings and spouses who have died before this person. I can talk about that later. Any special person, often a caretaker, that the family wants to recognize as having been so important toward the end. The place and date of funeral, this doesn't apply now, sadly, but when we are over this pandemic, that's the whole point, or the reason for the timeliness of an obituary is to let people know when the funeral is happening and where. And it usually ends with a charity or a cause that the person was really connected with, and so people can give a donation in that person's name. This form is still used in many local papers, which are very straightforward. People don't want to sort of get into quirky details. So but those basic facts have to be in there. Legacy.com is one place to look for sort of examples of that. And everdays.com has a very useful template to answering these questions. Now, when you go into the creative obits, those have become much more popular in the last, I'd say, 25 years. It started in England, where a lot of quirky, eccentric people are there. And so people like their obits to be more colorful and revealing of the personality of the person. So it migrated over here. These more creative obits have The likes, dislikes, habits, quirks, passions are included in, and even tastes. In my father's obit, I said that he loved peanut butter, you know. The end result is a more personal and lively obituary. The style is often used, particularly in the New York Times, which we'll get into in a second, for prominent people who are not famous enough to get their own obituary in the Times written by a Times reporter, but in the personal obit page, the paid obit. The details of the traditional obit, as I said, are just as important here. You have to have that basic punch list of facts, but then you can embellish in various ways.
So Kate, let me just stop you there. It's a lot of information. I want to give it a little bit of breath so we
Okay.
can really pick apart what you're saying.
Okay.
So the first part that I heard is the types of people to include that round out your story, right? So spouse or children or grandchildren, for example. And I think what you offer in terms of being a co-founder of Biography by Design is that you are a professional biographer. You write books, for a living. And so what I really appreciate about this is why, for endurance purposes, what I mean, like in perpetuity, for an enduring quality of an obit, why is it so important when you then research back to include those other people? Because that's the entry point of really knowing who this person was in a research sort of way. So can you help us understand why it is so important to include the other people in a family?
Well, it's a story. It's a life story. It's a mini biography, if you will. And a good biographer, the first place you go, if you're writing a biography of Susie Q or whatever, you go find her obituary. She's died, because that's the mother lode of information about that life, where they were born, when they died, and their different family members. You can use that to, as a biographer, to then branch out and know the network of this person and how they affected. It's also, on a more personal level, a bigger level, it's a record of a life. It's important. I mean, you don't want to just disappear. So it's the life story of this person. It stands as a permanent record of their lives.
And I think, to me, that's the really important part, is that the obituary that you are creating, it really does become the enduring story of your loved one's life. So the care that we take to make sure that the facts, ma'am, as you said, are correct, and we round it out with those other people in the family, that is the work of those who love that individual, right? Is to make sure the facts are recorded so future generations will have a record. I mean, I think that's what you're talking about. So in
Yeah.
terms of the color, you talked about in your father's obit, including that he loved peanut butter. What's appropriate? Is there anything that you think should be kind of off the table when you're thinking about whimsy and those kind of stories?
Um, well, it's a question of taste. And I think if it was something really outrageous, probably the paper or the source that you're submitting it to might, pull you up short. But no, not really. It's a balance. And I was going to say that you can often tell a funny story, as well as different quirks of the person. There's nothing really off limits. And some deaths are not, and don't be afraid to be funny. I mean, there's one that went viral on someone called Joe Heller, not the writer, but just Joe Heller, went viral because it was written by a family member from the heart. And he was a very unusual guy. And it was very funny, but also deeply moving. On the other hand, there are some deaths and circumstances that are not funny in any way. And there's no way. And the person might be or the family might not want these kinds of details in there. They just want a solid record of their accomplishments. Particularly a corporate type of person might want all the companies and the positions and the clubs and the philanthropies, and none of this sort of extraneous detail. It's so personal. It really depends on the family.
Well, here's a question that I just popped into my head, so forgive me if I'm catching you off guard. But there's a person who is writing this, or is it by committee? Like, do families write obituaries together? Do you need to get sign off from other members, or is that really too many cooks in the obituary kitchen. Can you help us understand what you think might be a best practice?
Yeah, in fact, that's a very good question. And actually, I was going to bring it up because it really should be a team effort. But be prepared for the fact that families are families. And so it's really important, I think, to circulate your draft. If you're writing it, circulate the draft to siblings or spouses or children, but try and keep it really tight, obviously for time reasons, etc. But you have to be super careful because the family will catch things that you might not have noticed. I think I told you the story of writing the obituary of my father, and I neglected to mention, and this has been a characteristic of traditional biographies, to always mention predeceased siblings. Well, I didn't mention Uncle Gordon, who was my father's older brother. And even though the younger brother reviewed the obit, he didn't catch it either. And Uncle Gordon's son, my cousin, didn't talk to me for years because I didn't mention. You want to, it is a family, it should be a lovely experience, even in a time of grief, if you're writing an obituary about a person who's already dead. There are also people writing their own obituaries in advance. But yes, to answer your question, it should be a group project with some limits.
Now, I know on Keeper that your obituary or your memorial that you can upload to Keeper really has a 10,000 character limit, or 10,000 character limit. And I'm wondering, what is the proper length for an obituary if you're going the traditional route, which would be for a newspaper? So to me, having a limit on Keeper, that seems to be more than enough, but maybe because it's on a platform that's, online, you have more space. But I'm wondering, in print, there is a space constraint, right? So what is the appropriate size, length, word count for an obit?
Well, it depends because you're also paying for the obit. So the length can dictate how much you want to pay. The average cost is about $200 to $500, not including a photo. We haven't talked about the photo, but we'll get into that in a minute because that's another important thing. It doesn't have to be in there, but it's a good deal. The New York Times, for example, and that's top of the line. And paid obituaries in the Times are often for more wealthy people because it's the Times, but also it's expensive. They charge, for example, $236 for the first 4 lines and $50 a line after that. They use a certain font, which is really teeny. I can show you Sunday's Times, 25 characters long. But traditionally, it's about 700 characters for a traditional biography. So that's, you have a tight little small one, but on the Keeper site, you can really go to town. You could, tell a much more full story.
Yeah, I wanted to attempt to share my screen, if everyone will indulge me just for a second. I know we're talking about newspaper obituaries, but there's one thing that really drew me to want to do this event for Keeper, which is to really, obituaries in the paper, they kind of disappear. I know you can access them now, you can Google them, you can try to find them later, but this enduring quality of having a memorial page, I think, is so amazing given our online world and capacity. So let me just show you one quick thing. I'm going to do my best to show it to you quickly. So hold on one second. I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see what I'm showing you guys now?
Mhm.
I hope.
Yep.
Okay. So let me try to make this just a little bit bigger. So you can see this page. And then the second page here is what I really wanted to focus on, which is that you could see the characters, that it's approaching 10,000. This is the enduring memorial page. So it takes what we're doing and then it gives it a permanent place. By having these memorial pages, they won't ever go away, right? And this is even the free version never goes away. And so I love that idea that you can have this page, have the photographs, you can even see in a very kind of Facebook grid looking way, the pictures that really define your loved one's life. But when it comes to the biography, you have this wonderful way of having it endure, and so it doesn't disappear, which is really my point. So let me just stop sharing my screen for the moment. You guys can see me again? Okay. Just want to make sure I showed that. So yeah, I see you waving, Kate. So in terms of I want to talk about facts. I know, Kate, you're an expert at finding hard to locate information for the subjects of your biography. But many of us who are on this call today are not professional researchers. And so it may sound more easy to someone of your credentials to be able to say, oh, just find the information. But can you help us? How would you go about finding the hard to determine dates that you may need, the high school where maybe your loved one went, or the college? Like, how do you put these nuts and bolts together if you're unsure?
Yeah, well, we're talking now about obituaries of people who have died.
Yeah.
And usually a family member is enlisted to do this, or if they're uncomfortable for any reason, you can hire someone to do it. The richest source, again, going back to circulating the draft, the richest source of information is the family. So if there's a surviving spouse, siblings will remember the schools, trusted friends, colleagues in work will remember work history. So that's where you start. Good old Google is an excellent place to go on and check for the appropriate spelling of places or firm names, corporate names, nonprofit names, if you want to get them exactly right. If your subject, if the deceased person kept a scrapbook, is of that generation that kept a scrapbook, that's a wonderful, my father had a scrapbook, but you can go crazy with too much detail. So, keep that in mind. The best is the enemy of the good. Alumni organizations are really helpful. So you can double check the dates that the person went, and if there were any activities that that you want to include. Local library researchers are phenomenal. And what they don't know, they know where to find it. And again, when you're writing an obituary for someone who has just died, it has to be a little bit more rushed. I mean, not now in the time of the pandemic, but in normal times, you want the obituary to come out in enough time to alert people to come to the funeral and to be able to share in the mourning of this person. So it's a pressure, but those are the basic places for information.
While your internet is getting back up, it looks like you're glitching out just a little bit. I
Okay.
want to ask you a question that may seem a bit off color, if you don't mind, which is it okay to write an obit before your loved one dies if you are anticipating their death, if they're really ill? Um, is that something that you would recommend? I know for me, which is the great secret of newsrooms across the country, that when we have great Americans or anyone around the world who is of a certain age and they die, and within 30 seconds, there's this beautiful, 5-minute retrospective piece that runs on television. It's not because they just started at that moment, right? They have these planned obituaries, whether it's in print or in a video, in the can, they say, right? It's waiting for that time. So do you feel that's a little bit uncomfortable, or do you recommend that individuals approach obituary writing in somewhat of the same way?
No, that's a really good question. And I would say, no, there's nothing off color about it at all. In fact, I just finished helping an elderly friend of mine write her obituary and edit it for her because she wants it all ready for her children. She's not sick. She's not going to die anytime soon, I hope. But that's the other kind of obituary. And in that case, if you are the one writing the obituary or you're helping a loved one, you can get all the information or most of it that you need from the person themselves. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people do that, particularly ones who've had really long, or any kind of life, but particularly a long, complicated, productive life that's involved a lot of different jobs and transitions. Somebody has to get it down, and it'll be really hard afterwards, as we've talked about. So yes, I don't think that's off color at all. I think a lot of people are doing that. And then they have it ready, can be updated, and it's ready to go.
I almost love the fact too of the person who perhaps is dying, being given the opportunity to weigh in, if that's even possible, right? If the loved one is present enough, and perhaps it's an opportunity to enjoy some reflection, to enjoy some storytelling, to honor even the stories that may not make it into the memorial page, let's say on Keeper, or into the obit, let's say that you're submitting for print. I guess that would be an extra opportunity to share stories, which I think would be an incredible opportunity as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, again, it's up to the individual family, up to whatever the dynamics is. It's so variable, but it can be an opportunity for something. When I did help this friend that I mentioned, who's not a family member, write her obituary, I loved doing it because I learned about this amazing life, which I'd known just a little bit. She was a young woman once, with children and a family, and I learned all about that, which was a privilege. I really enjoyed doing that. It was
I'm
great.
going to remind folks who are on the call right now where we are in our conversation. We are about at the halfway mark, which means that after my next question to Kate, I will be opening up the chat, going through them with Christina's help to identify the questions that you want to have answered. And so please, as I'm asking Kate the next question, if you've come here today and you had something on your mind, I really hope that you use the opportunity to ask Kate, who is this incredible expert on obituary writing, on writing the craft of writing biographies. We are here because of Keeper, this incredible online memorial platform. And so really take advantage of it. We wouldn't be here without Keeper. So thank you for doing that. So keep your questions coming, and Christina will go through them in just a few minutes. But I do have one last question for you, Kate, before we do open it up for Q&A, which is this. If you are submitting your obituary of your loved one to a newspaper, is it possible, knowing that we may be incredibly raw after a death, can you pre-submit an obit? Like if you know someone's gonna die, and they're incredibly ill, and you don't know exactly, of course, when the death is gonna happen, can you get the logistics out of the way and then just alert an editor that, you know what, it's time? Or have you ever heard of such a thing? Or is it better just to have it all written, then, submit it at that point? Can you pre-submit, I guess is my odd question.
I have never heard of that being done. And actually, I can't see the point of it. I mean, I think um, there's a logical and appropriate sequence of things in this life and also with death. And I think great if you've written it in advance. Most of the time we haven't because we have to write it afterwards. No, I would wait until the actual death occurs. And it's so easy. I mean, you can pick up the phone and talk to the local editor and submit your obit, or you can go online. It's not complicated at all. So I would say, no, I would let life make that decision for you.
I would, just before we open it up to Q&A, where I was going with that is
Mhm.
that if you anticipate being too wrecked, right, being too upset to kind of do that piece of logistics, one alternative, if Kate, what you're saying is definitely true, which I appreciate that you really wouldn't do a pre-submission, is maybe since you've already written it, and it's a document. And if you are submitting it to, let's say, a newspaper or what have you, maybe give the task of the actual submission to a loved one, a friend or a relative who
Right.
can just press submit when it's time. So you've done the work, but then when the death happens and you really don't want to be involved with the submission, perhaps it just is something that you can then hand off responsibly to somebody else to handle the logistics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that kind of goes back to our idea that it's a family project, it's a family task, it's a family privilege. So
Yeah.
if the designated family member who's written it has passed it around and made sure that it's as accurate as it can be, and keep in mind you'll never please everyone, then that organically there would be some other person who would say, of course, hey, I'll do that. everybody steps up in these times.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Christina, I'm going to hand the baton to you, but I did see a question go through the chat, which is about, do the memorial pages on Keeper last, forever? And that's the great thing I am so drawn to about the platform, is that the answer is yes. So while an obituary in a paper may feel more fleeting, and that perhaps you don't feel like it's doing your loved one justice because people might forget that the obit is there, what you have on Keeper is that it lasts, in perpetuity. And I just, both my parents died when I was relatively young, as a young adult. And I think that's really something that moves me about the platform. But Christina, please, the floor is yours. Tell us what questions that you're seeing.
I was going to add one thing now quickly to that. You can do both. For example, if you're living in New York, or I was in California where my parents died, you may want to have that paid obit in the Times and also put it in Keeper, so that the network of the New York people see it, and that it is kept in perpetuity in Keeper. The local community is important, particularly as we get smaller, not New York and San Francisco, but you get a small local community like mine in Charlottesville. They're all reading, the older people are reading the obituaries like crazy. So it's very important to have it in that paper. But then you can keep it in Keeper.
Yep. Thank you. All right, Christina, you're up.
Okay, so I see a lot of questions about how to get in touch with the speakers and how does Keepers work exactly. And I just want everyone to know there will be a thank you email sent out with a bunch of links and where to learn more. So don't fret if you didn't take notes during this. So to get some live questions, someone would like to know why newspapers charge so much for such little text, and what advice do you have for newspaper obits in addition to free online options?
Well, there are plenty. I mentioned a couple of sites earlier. I'll find them in a minute. One theory that they're charging so much is because they need the money. So it's a kind of it's not really a classified ad, but it is a money-making thing for newspapers, and it's a service. So you pay for that service. So that's part of the reason. And the New York Times, here's Sunday's Times, little teeny weeny little print, tiny, like 7 font. But in terms of submitting, everyone is different. So just when you can go on, I think it was legacy.com. Yeah, it makes it really easy by listing alphabetically by state, hyperlinks to all the papers in that state, the obituary. And you can just click on it and it'll take you to that particular paper, which makes it really easy.
What I would just amplify in terms of like doing both, we talked about there being a newspaper option and let's say an online digital option. There are many free services out there, right? There are many paid services out there. But if you want the capacity to upload, videos of your loved one, like home movies or photographs of your loved one, let's say when they were children or, in high school or when they got married, like those are just really wonderful ways of kind of bringing the traditional obit into 2020, right? Having this kind of multimedia way to memorialize your loved one. And, all that is the kind of stuff you can get for free with Keeper. And I know there's a paid version as well, which is also, I think, cheaper than what you're talking about, Kate, in terms of some of the paid advertisements in print. And so any which way, I love the idea of this multimedia aspect. I know for me, both my parents died before social media. And then when I'm able to upload and digitize pictures of them and see them in this kind of contemporary context, I must say, it's a way of keeping your loved ones closer. And I really do appreciate that opportunity too. But Christina, other questions?
Sure. Kate, you mentioned 2 websites early on in the talk. I heard legacy.com, and I think the other one was everyday.com. Is that correct?
Everydays.
Everydays.
Yes, .com.
Okay, I will put those in the chat. People were asking about those.
Sorry, Everdays.
Everdays. Okay, got it.
That's the one that has useful template.
One person asked, does the obit have to be submitted by the funeral home to the newspaper?
No, no, absolutely not. That happens a lot. When my parents died, for example, we didn't deal with the funeral home at all. I mean, they had prepaid for their cremation, and that was that. And we had funeral services and memorials and all of that stuff, but we didn't deal with the funeral home at all. But that is a possibility, and that might be a preferable one for some people.
What I love, by the way, that I keep thinking about is what you talked about before about putting in those creative anecdotes. So when you're done writing the obituary, whether or not it's for print or you're uploading it to an online platform, I just, it's interesting. I never would have thought about, like, I'm coming back to your peanut butter example. I hate to harp on it, but my father loved everything lemon sorbet, lemon meringue pie. I mean, anything lemon. And my mother was a chocolate fiend, loved chocolate. And so I love the idea of making these obituaries so much more colorful. And ultimately, by making them more colorful, like any piece of good writing, it's going to be more memorable, right? And like, isn't that what writing a good, perfect obituary? Actually, what would you define, Kate? That's the perfect question. I should have led with this. What would be the elements of the perfect obituary? I know we've talked about some of the most important factors, but would you have like your top 3 suggestions for writing the perfect obit? What might that be?
Well, I think I would be in favor, and you would be too, of the more creative obituary, the one that includes details like peanut butter and chocolate. You really have to, the perfect obituary would create the personality and recreate the character and personality of the person, which we do that as we do with people we know, through their likes, their dislikes, their quirks, their habits, their passions. It could be a sport. It could be a favorite story that the family's told forever that brings him alive, a famous mentor or someone who helped, or not famous. So a perfect obituary is this tapestry of these different threads that are woven together. And when you step back, like with that Joe Heller obit that I just recommended, you feel like you know the person, because the writer has thought carefully to put this together into a composite picture, and the person pops right off the page.
And I'll say, I'm just going to interject this now. I was going to save this for the end. But what really excites me, Kate, about the work that you are doing with Biography by Design is that some of this may feel very intimidating to some folks who are on the call today. But there is an opportunity to write an obit with a professional. And I know that with all the changes going on with Keeper, they are redesigning the site for 2021 in the next year. And part of the site redesign, besides the store that they already have there, which I think is awesome, one of the big redesigns that they're doing is hopefully developing a partnership with you and Biography by Design. So if you do want to like raise the right white flag and say, you're going to tap out and this is too much work, or maybe you don't know where to begin, or it's just you're finding it too stressful or emotionally challenging, there will be this opportunity, hopefully with this partnership between Biography by Design, your company, and Keeper in the early part of the year. So I think there is help out there, which I think is really important.
I think one other suggestion I would make too is that you can tape, if you're interviewing a person, if they haven't died yet, or you're interviewing different family members, there are programs where you can tape an interview and it will be transcribed. And that can be your first draft. If you're a little bit inhibited about actually writing that blank page or blank screen in front of you, taping is wonderful. Then at least you've gotten over that first hurdle. That helps a lot.
That's interesting. All right, Christina, sorry that I interrupted there, but I forgot that, some folks may not even want to write this themselves. They really want to bring in a helping hand. And you know what? That is a perfectly wonderful opportunity that no one should think is not appropriate. You don't have to struggle on your own, which is really the point.
Thank you.
So, Kate, I did share the link to the Joe Heller obituary that you mentioned. But someone asked where to find other creative obituaries. Do you find that a certain newspaper or website shares creative ones?
Huh. Well, just in your local paper. I mean, I would go on the New York Times because I had two examples here I was going to read from that are really good examples. Look up last Sunday's Times, and they're and your local paper. You find really, really good examples. They're everywhere. Everywhere that has obituaries has examples of creative.
Is there a line or two in the samples that you brought with you today, like even a sentence or two that you can, tell us what you think worked?
Right here. Yeah, here you go. Yeah, this is Gail, very social, died in Palm Beach. And Gail cherished her many friends throughout her life. She was known and loved for her kind and generous nature. She was an advocate for education, a talented gardener, an avid tennis player, a warm and welcoming hostess, the more the merrier. So this is homemaker. This is not a famous person, but it goes on and on. And she also remembers, I forgot to mention this, her dog Rowdy is the survivor. So you could also mention your dog, as many of us would.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
So our next question, I know we talked briefly about writing your own obituary before passing away, but someone asked about obituaries and eulogies and giving them to your adult kids while you're still healthy. Would either of you like to talk about that?
Well, I'll jump in to say there's a big difference between an obituary and a eulogy, and Allison could expand on this too. A eulogy traditionally, and I think it's more important, is written by someone else, not yourself. It's a tribute to you by a child or a spouse or a sibling at the funeral, or distributed now since we aren't having funerals. It's a tribute to the person. And maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I wouldn't do a eulogy on myself. I don't know, Allison, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I appreciate what you're saying. And then I guess if I knew that I was dying, and I guess we all know at some point we're going to pass away, that if there were things that you feel are so important that you want as part of your legacy, it's almost like you're a speech writer assistant, right? You're going to give those factoids that you feel is so important to who you are, that if it wasn't mentioned, if you could hear it, which of course you won't be able to hear it, if you could have heard it, that you would feel that it wasn't giving the full picture. And so maybe the middle ground might be is almost playing the role of speech writer researcher, and providing some bullet points if you're feeling ambitious to your loved one who would ultimately have that responsibility. I feel like that's appropriate, and actually may feel very peace inducing, right? If you feel like you've had a hand in how you might be remembered, I would imagine that would kind of lower some anxiety for some people who are facing death, to know that you've had a say in how you might be remembered in perpetuity.
And on that note, Mandy, who is the founder of Keeper, shared that you're able to write your own obituary in Keeper before you pass away and store it on their website. And then after you pass away, your family becomes the keeper and they are able to publish your memorial page that you helped build.
Thank you, Mandy. Mandy, you're awesome. I really appreciate you adding that. That's really an important point. And so I do, some of us are really type A and some of us really want to have a hand in how we are memorialized. And I do think Keeper can do that beforehand. And also there's multiple administrators when you get to the paid version of Keeper, which I think is only $74.99 a year, but there's multiple administrators. So you don't have to carry that burden by yourself. There's of course the free version. And then if you want to have more administrators, that's a real kind of relief, I think, to not carry that burden on your own. So yay, thanks, Mandy. Thank you.
Another private question I received, is it necessary to include the cause of death? Some causes of death are sensitive.
No, it's not necessary. Yes, some causes are sensitive, and so as often as not, you will see no cause of death. So I think it's up to the individual case.
Is there a formal title for obituaries written in advance, apart from pre-written obituary?
Not that I'm aware of. Do you know any, Allison? I don't think there's a formal title.
I don't know a formal title. I don't know. You guys can email Kate or me afterward and let us know if you've come up with one or find one, but I don't know of a name.
I don't either. Good question.
Yeah.
Let me just continue to look through. We have a lot of people sharing resources.
Hey, Kate, I have a question for you. Is there, if you don't mind, just while Christina is looking, I'm wondering about in terms of like who does, this is kind of the family sensitivity issue. I know we've talked about family inclusion, and I know there might never be kind of, agreement on every single part of an obituary, but there must be the person who makes the ultimate call. And I'm wondering if, let's say, um, a mother passes away. Is it the surviving spouse that has the final say? Is it a child that has the final say? Do you feel like there is a hierarchy when it comes to who does get to have the ultimate submit button power? Or is that going to be a family by family choice? I'm just wondering about power dynamics in families and if it's different in terms of obits, in terms of who's closest to the deceased.
Mhm. That's a really good question. I think there's no easy answer. I think often it would be the spouse. But if there isn't a surviving spouse, like, well, you and I probably were asked to do it because we're the writers, so I got designated as the obit writer. But no, I think, again, it's very sensitive. It has to be a communal effort, but there's no hierarchy, and certainly not in our children's, world. There's no hierarchy. I mean, it's everyone's voice should be heard. There has to be a great deal of sensitivity to this project.
Thank you. Thank you. Christina, we have time for maybe one or two more questions, and then I'm going to throw it back to Kate with a couple more of my own questions. But please, let's do 2 or 3 more from everyone who has taken the time to join us today. And I've promised everyone we will be done on time. I know this is a lunch and learn, and so you will get out on time, I promise. I'm sensitive to the clock. I see that it's almost 1:20 here in New York, and I'm sensitive that we all have kids maybe to care for or work to get to, or maybe just want to go out in nature and get a walk, which is really important these days too, for sure. So Christina, maybe take 1 or 2 or 3 more questions, and then I'll give Kate my final couple.
Sure. I got one question, another one for Kate. You said that you had a few obituaries that you had marked. If you could read just a few more sentences that you thought stood out to you.
Thank you. Well, this same woman was very lovely at the end. Hold on just a second. She was always thoughtful, always loyal, and everything good, which I thought was lovely. And the man, the other obituary, was a man who, this was more, well, that was more of a, he was a writer. He was a Broadway producer and playwright. And he couldn't go through a day without writing. And so they quote him as saying, the day wasn't complete if I wasn't writing. So it really was an important element of his life. He loved to fly. When he was a young man, he got a pilot's license and would fly around New Jersey and New York in his American Champ. So, these details are all wonderful. They really bring him alive.
Kate, I'm curious before Christina, I'm interrupting Christina already. I'm putting you on the spot, Kate.
Okay.
What 1 or 2 fluffy, colorful sentences would you like in your obit about you?
Oh gosh. That gets to the essence of this thing. I would rather leave that to my children, because they're going to have a different perspective. They're going to have an insight that I wouldn't have. I'm their mother, you know, I'm gonna cry now, but I would rather, even though I won't read it because I won't be here, but I think those other perspectives are really important. So I will dodge that question.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, Christina, back to you.
We actually don't have any more audience questions unless anyone has some last minute notes they want to type in the chat.
All right. Well, while that's happening, I have a few wrap up type questions. Oh, there's more coming in. Hold on one second. Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you, Stephanie, who also works with Mandy at Keeper. Just thanking everyone for coming today. I thank you guys too. An hour in the middle of a school day and a work day. I am so grateful. Oh, I didn't realize that. There's 15% off your Keeper Plus membership today only by using the code Cyber Monday 15. That's pretty awesome. So thank you, Stephanie, for flagging that. Kate, let's just go back to, we wanted to make sure people feel very heard and validated by spending their time with us today. We promised them tips for writing the perfect obit. We've covered many different parts. We've covered just the facts, ma'am, as you've described. We've talked about putting some whimsy and not being fearful or worried about color. We've talked about dynamics and really not doing this on your own and feeling the pressure of owning this individually, that you can really bring in the power of family. And we've also talked, when it came to family, that there's other opportunities to then give off responsibility. So once the obit is written, and again, we've also talked about the importance of pre-writing an obituary. So you're not scrambling at the end if you can. Not every family will have this opportunity. We, of course, recognize. But there is nothing wrong. It may feel odd to pre-write an obituary, but all news organizations do this work as a matter of course for those celebrities who we know are of advancing age. So if they can do it, we can of course do this for our families too. We know that Keeper allows us to also pre-write our own obituaries if we would want that opportunity to do so. We know that Keeper allows multiple voices to administer the memorial pages, which of course takes the ownership off, again, the individual. One person shouldn't feel the weight of this on their own shoulders. We've also learned from you, Kate, which I'm so grateful for, that there's really no must do, mustn't do. So for example, there was a question about, must you include the cause of death in an obituary? And the answer from you, Kate, was no. You can just leave that out. So that's okay. And so the rules seem to be, if there are rules, that a perfect obituary would include the facts. It would include the children and the parents and any surrounding immediate family members. And of course, as Kate, you learned the hard way, even siblings who predeceased your loved one should be included, because a perfect obituary becomes a repository for future generations to know about your loved one. So I think I have encapsulated what it means to write the perfect obituary. Did I leave anything out, Kate?
Well, I was going to get into, and I can run through this very quickly, some questions to ask on the more creative obituary, to the question of how do you write the perfect obituary. These are some tips that people listening can be thinking about. How would you describe your loved one's personality? What did people say most often about him or her? What are some of your favorite memories about him or her? This is a good one. What were your loved one's proudest accomplishments? And what were their favorite hobbies, favorite things? What was the thing you loved most about this person? And any foibles, quirks, or other personality traits that made this person extra special. that's a sort of a rundown of the kinds of details that would flesh out to make a perfect obituary.
Can you say those again? I know that we don't have, this is the first we're hearing of it. I want to make sure that it went by fast, at least for me. Can
Well,
you run by that list again? So if you are taking notes, that you can have a better chance of doing that. Can you do that again, Kate?
1, how would you describe your loved one's personality? What did people say most often about him or her? 2, what are some of your favorite memories of your loved one? 3, what were your loved one's proudest accomplishments? 4, what were your loved one's hobbies, favorite things? Peanut butter. What was the thing you loved most about your loved one? And 6th and last, any foibles, quirks, or other personality traits that made this person extra special?
I love that. Thank you so much, Kate. So Christina, if there's no pressing question that's come in, tell me now before I wrap things up and make sure people are getting out on time. Anything that's pressing at the moment?
Just a note from one of our viewers that nobody's perfect. So writing the perfect obituary maybe means an obituary that you're proud of, we'll say instead.
Oh, I like that. That's really
The imperfect
yes.
obituary.
Yes, no, I love that. And I appreciate that comment very, very, very much. Of course. That makes total sense. So let me start first by thanking Kate Buford. You are a light. I am so thrilled that you and Abby have put together this remarkable company called Biography by Design. I'm sorry Abby had some tech issues today and couldn't join us from her perch in Block Island on Rhode Island, but we get it. You know, this is the age of Zoom and internet foibles, and so I totally get it and appreciate it. Kate, I think you handled the duo with great aplomb, so thank you for doing that. And what?
Thanks to you.
Oh, and I am thrilled that it seems that in early 2021, as Keeper does a whole revamp of its platform, that if you do want some hand-holding and you don't want to do this obituary writing on your own, you really do not have to. That Keeper and Biography by Design are coming up with some special packages that you can take advantage of, which I think is completely brilliant and smart, because not all of us are professional researchers or writers. So I'm excited to look at that. I know the holidays are around the corner. Keeper also has an online shop that if you personally, or if you know someone in your life who has just suffered a loss and you want to have access to specific kind of grief gifts that would be respectful of where you or they are in this moment in 2020, a holiday season unlike any other, I would definitely recommend you check out Keeper's shop. And finally, Mandy, who runs Keeper, the founder of Keeper, wherever you are on this Zoom call, I thank you. It is a special company indeed that sees the need for this kind of free offering, puts their resources where their mouth is, that provides this opportunity at no cost to everyone who joined us today. And so, Keeper, I really tip my hat to you for allowing us to come together in a safe space today. Christina, thank you for being my partner in crime and going through the chat and getting everyone in order today. I'm so grateful. We have recorded this session. What our plan is to do is tomorrow. This is the plan. Our plan is to send an email out tomorrow with as many of the links that we've come up with today in this chat and in our conversation. We will have the entire recording of our conversation today. So if there's parts that you wanted to go back to, if you missed, you'll be more than welcome to do that as well. But with 1 minute left, we are on time. So I just want to say from me, Allison Gilbert here in New York, I am thrilled to have spent this hour with you. I am honored and I am grateful for your time. And I wish you peace and healing in this very unusual holiday season. So thank you again for coming to Keeper's first Lunch and Learn. We really appreciate your time. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming. Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Allison. Good job.
Bye, everybody.